Today's topic is the learning mind. Krishnamurti said that the learning mind is the true religious mind. He meant the learning as self-knowledge, not the other learning that we go through in school and college, which is accumulative learning that cultivates memory and skills and expands our knowledge. Self-knowledge is not knowledge at all. It is discriminating between what is true and what is false. And he said it is self-knowledge is the key to wisdom. And it is wisdom that transforms consciousness and brings virtue into consciousness. And since the real purpose of religion is to come upon virtue, therefore he said the learning mind is the true religious mind. So we'll go into that today as far as we can. Now, as we grow up in a particular family, a particular society, a particular country, we imbibe the culture around us as children. And that constitutes our conditioning, the moral values of that culture, the food habits, the ideas of success and failure, all that constitutes our conditioning because we imbibe that as we grow up. Now, there are a number of things which are factual in that, like language and so on. But there are also a lot of false notions. And it is those false notions which create disorder in consciousness. So they are referred to as illusions because they are just constructs of thought which we are accepting as true. They are not part of nature. And if they create disorder, then they can be dispelled by discovering that they are false, that they are just constructs of thought. I think in one of the previous talks, we went into it in detail, but I'll summarize it here because it's relevant for this kind of learning. The nature of those illusions varies from culture to culture, but they lie at various depths of our consciousness. At the very superficial level, they are superstitions. They vary from one culture to another, and they produce a lot of fear and doubt in the mind, creating disorder in consciousness. Then there are all these cultural illusions. The idea of success, the fact that you must compete and rise above all your colleagues, the belief in God, the rituals, the definitions of virtue, what is right action, what is wrong action, what you should be doing, what you should not be doing. All that, we imbibe all that. And from that, we assess and judge ourselves as well as others. and a lot of it is untrue or false. So those constitute a whole large range of illusions. Casteism, in every religion there are divisions like Shia and Sunni with different beliefs in Islam, and different casteism in Hindus, and the Catholics and Protestants in the Christian religion, and so on. So they are a source of a lot of division and disorder because people get attached to them. They call it my culture, my belief, and so on. You identify with it. We went into that, how that kind of identification creates division. And from that division comes hatred and war and all that. So a lot of disorder comes out of all these cultural illusions. Then there are the psychological illusions, which psychologists talk about. And in psychoanalysis, they try to unravel from the past certain fears or anxieties and so on, which come from childhood and memories of pleasure and pain suffered in childhood, or insults and so on. So psychological memories, they are deeper. They are more difficult to eradicate. And finally, there is this feeling of being a separate me, a separate individual, separate from the rest of the world. Sages have pointed out that that is also a creation of thought, so it's an illusion, but a very persistent illusion. One feels oneself separate from others and also from nature and so on. But it comes out of identification with the body, with the mind, which means the conditioning, or the country, or ideology, etc. So it creates the me and the mind, and the attachment to the me and the mind as the ego. And we said that that hijacks the mind into defending the me and the mind and promoting the interests of the me and the mind and so on, which means the ego gets entrenched. And that is the cause of almost all disorder in our consciousness. Now, because it originates from illusion, therefore it can be ended. Because illusion can be ended by discerning what is true and what is false. Of course, one doesn't know what is true and what is false. So you have to posit the truth as the unknown and discover it. That is the difficulty of this quest. And it becomes the truth for you when you yourself perceive it with all your senses and being. You can't come to it through only intellectual analysis and logic, like we do in science or in mathematics and so on. Not that that logic or mathematics is wrong, but it's partial, fragmentary, not holistic. And truth is a holistic perception of what actually is, not a fragmentary perception, not a partial perception. So that is the difficulty of this learning, that it is not already known. There is no teacher to teach you that. No book which can give you that. They can point out, but you have to come upon perception. Perception cannot be given to you by another, which is what it means that you have to be a light unto yourself. So the learning mind is a mind that knows that it does not know the truth, which is true humility. And it is wanting to discover the truth. It's a little bit like the game children play, which is called treasure hunt. So the school teacher hides some sort of treasure, either chocolates or some other treasure, somewhere in a garden, and then releases the children there and says, find the treasure. You don't know where the treasure is. All you know is it is somewhere in this garden. So that garden corresponds to the question that you are investigating. It defines the area in which you are looking. But the truth, you don't know where the truth is. It lies inside that question. So you have to investigate that question and come upon the unknown. The truth is the unknown. The known is the conditioning, which contains all the illusions. And that is also the reason why you cannot do this intellectually, because thought itself is a product of the conditioning. It arises from memory, and memory contains all these illusions. So thought becomes a colored instrument. It is affected by your desires, by all kinds of subjective knowledge which you possess. So perception is not pure, and truth is a pure perception, undistorted by the contents of your conditioning. It's like discovering something new. And that is the difficulty. That's why there is no teacher who can teach. And that state of mind, which knows that it does not know, therefore doubts all opinions, respects them, in the sense listens to them, neither agrees with them nor disagrees with them, but treats them as a question and stays with that question and tries to discover through observation. Now the observation is also colored. Huh? So what to do? If thought cannot be used because thought is a colored instrument, then do we have another instrument which we can use? And the answer is yes. We have the capacity for awareness. Awareness is not conditioned. It is simply in the present. It's not affected by the past. After watching, after being aware, the conclusions which you form out of it are affected by the conditioning. Therefore, it's important to do this inquiry itself non-egotistically. Because through an egotistic inquiry, you cannot come to freedom from the ego. Through violence, you cannot come to peace. Peace is the way. So that's the nature of this learning mind, the religious mind, that it stays with questions and it is observing keenly in daily life, in relationships, because they are revealing your consciousness, and you have to be extremely honest. If you are interested in impressing people or showing off, then you are not honest. You have to be completely honest. Those are prerequisites for this learning mind. You will do this only if you have the passion for discovering the truth being the undistorted perception of what actually is the fact, not propaganda, not promoting one and rejecting another. So it has to be free from measurement. It has to be free from judgment. That's why the approach itself matters enormously. Not only about others and the external life, but also inwardly. What's going on in our consciousness? Can you be a true friend to yourself? Be completely honest, be yourself. Don't try to change yourself, but watch what's going on with the desire to learn about it. The desire to learn is not an egoistic desire. The desire to become, the desire to achieve is an egoistic desire. So there is this passion to learn because there is great joy in learning, the joy of learning. In this case, about oneself, about one's own consciousness, how it functions. And that's why it's called self-knowledge, because nobody else can give you that knowledge. You have to come upon it yourself. Not that analysis and thought and logic don't apply, but they are limited. They won't take you all the way to perception. They will create a final question. So you can use them in order to clarify the question, to communicate with oneself. So this learning mind is also a mind in dialogue with itself, because it's not taking sides with any view, therefore it is in dialogue with itself. And it's important to listen to all views without either accepting or rejecting them. That's how one becomes more intelligent, by listening to all what other people are saying from the point of view of learning for oneself. Neither rejecting it nor accepting it, but converting it into a question. But first you have to listen with respect and ask yourself, what is he trying to convey? The words that he is using, what do they mean? And then, having got the meaning, you have to ask yourself, is that true? And not answer it from your knowledge or your opinions, because that's part of your conditioning, but from awareness, from watching in daily life. That's what Krishnamurti taught, that is what you have to do. So people asked him, it seems that this is something one can only do by oneself. So is there nothing that one can do together by way of this inquiry? And he pointed out that because the truth is the same for everybody, it can be done together, provided each one of us sets aside his own knowledge and talks from his perception, which is in the present, perception in the present. It's so difficult for us because we are so addicted to our thinking and our opinions and our knowledge that it rarely happens. But when two friends are very intimate, close together, seriously considering a question, you can have that kind of communion where they are not competing with each other. But when you have a large group of 20, 30 people, it becomes difficult because different people are at different levels of understanding. Some are still thinking in terms of the definition of words, what religion means or what God means, and so on. And there are others who have crossed that. And so different levels of understanding. And so it comes to a common denominator between the whole group. And that's why it is difficult to do what Krishnamurti has pointed out, in principle, would be a dialogue, which means you could do this inquiry together. If all of us posit the truth as the unknown and don't bring in our own knowledge or our own opinions into the dialogue, not argue from a particular point of view, but be interested in what you're perceiving and doubt what you are perceiving, because it can be distorted. But listen to the other and his perceptions. So he likened it in a way, he gave the metaphor of a game of tennis. He says, the question is the ball. I send the ball to you with my comments about how I perceive it. The comment is around that question which you are discussing. I look at your comment and I return it to you with my comment. So the ball comes back to your court and this game goes on until both the players disappear and the ball is left hanging in midair. That means only observation is taking place and the observers are missing. So you have to eliminate yourself as the observer, observer being this conditioned entity. Don't bring in your conditioning, and the others also don't bring in their conditioning. Then there is pure observation around that question, and you can discuss each other's observation. But we find it very difficult to do because we are habituated to debates and discussions where each one has taken sides with a particular point of view and argues for that point of view. And there is victory and defeat in a debate. In a dialogue, there is no victory or defeat. There is no competition. There is no rival. Because there is no higher or lower. It is our knowledge that divides us. Somebody knows more, somebody knows less. But the one who knows more is not closer to perception than the one who knows less. So from the point of view of perceiving the truth, you are at the same level, irrespective of how much knowledge you might have. Indeed, knowledge can be a barrier if you are attached to it. So I remember a dialogue, it's there somewhere on the video, where David Bohm was all the time telling Krishnamurti, sir, how would you explain this? How would you explain that? And Krishnaji looked at him and said, sir, are you only interested in explanations? It's not the field of explanations. It's the field of perception. That's what he was trying to point out. That are you only interested in explanations? Because in science and so on, The explanation is the proof, and the conclusion is the ultimate truth. Because there, the truth is a rational conclusion is considered to be truth. Here, the rational conclusion is not the truth because it's not the perception. Otherwise, every philosophy professor, I mean, they come to rational conclusions, but they don't have the truth. It doesn't transform their consciousness. So those are the difficulties of this kind of learning, which we call self-knowledge. And time doesn't help you to come upon perception because the barrier is within oneself, and that barrier doesn't decrease with time. So there is no gradual evolution. You don't come upon 25% of the truth, then 50% of the truth, then at the top of the hill. It's not like that, not like a spiral road going up the hill. You're either at the bottom of the hill or you're at the top of the hill, like in a quantum transition. Either the electron is in one orbit or it is in the other orbit. There is no gradual passage from one orbit to the other. So there is a parallel with that here. That's why the intellectual is not closer to the truth than the ignorant man. He is just in a different prison, and he hasn't come upon freedom either. So you are not gradually coming upon the truth. Either you have perceived or you have not perceived. Krishna said it's like pregnancy. Either you are pregnant or you are not pregnant. There is no such thing as being 50% pregnant. Then people asked him, sir, right now we are all organizing your lectures, holding discussions with you, doing this inquiry along with you in dialogues, in camps, and so on. What will happen to all this activity after you are not there? And he said, this inquiry has nothing to do with me. It's something all human beings need to engage in, because everybody needs to free himself from this ego process and the illusions in the mind. Unfortunately, our education doesn't create a mind that is working in the field of self-knowledge. It has only created the field of knowledge. And knowledge brings power, but not wisdom. And power without wisdom is dangerous. So there has been a lopsided development of the human being, human mind. And that you can trace all the disorder in society to that. Too much power, too much knowledge, too little wisdom. So this is a quest for wisdom. And it is this kind of learning that transforms consciousness, which means it is wisdom that transforms consciousness. Wisdom being a more holistic understanding of the way our consciousness operates. Otherwise, we deceive ourselves. We blame the external circumstances, or we blame the other person for our problems, when we are ourselves contributing to that problem, but we don't realize that. And therefore, the learning does not take place. So if you take side with yourself, which is what the ego does, then it blocks this kind of learning. The ego is the greatest block to self-knowledge, to this kind of learning. Because the ego is not interested in the truth. It's interested in victory for its own point of view, for its own opinion, and it will fight for its opinion, which is what you see going on in society and also between individuals. Opinions divide. So one has to go beyond one's conditioning to come upon the truth. You can't come upon it through your conditioning. Let me illustrate that with a couple of examples. If you have an ego, you have what is called a reactive mind. The egoistic mind is not a learning mind. Now, I have been a physics teacher, and suppose I take a lot of pains to teach the subject to my students, and one of the students goes out of the class and says to others, I don't understand what Prof. Krishna teaches. He's a lousy teacher because I don't understand what he's saying. And this is communicated to me. If I have a reactive mind, I feel angry. I feel insulted. I say, I work so hard to teach these people. He doesn't pay attention in the class and he badmouths me. Afterwards, let him come. I'll see how he can behave like that. And you get angry and you scold him and so on. So you learn nothing from the episode. But suppose you have a learning mind. The learning mind doesn't react. It just observes and listens. And it gets the information that there is one student in my class who is not understanding what I am teaching. So I ask myself, is he the only one or are there more such students? And to find that out, next day I go to the class and I ask them, have you understood what I taught last time? And a number of hands go up saying, no, we have not understood. So it tells me that I am probably assuming a lot of prior knowledge on their part, which they don't have. So I should be aware of where they are stuck and start from there, rather than from my own level of teaching. So I can improve my teaching. So I have learned a lot from that remark, instead of getting angry and reacting and so on. So that's how the egoistic mind, the reactive mind, prevents learning. And if that reaction is not there, that ego reaction is not there, then everything becomes a source of learning through observation and through inquiry. That's the nature of the learning mind. And the coloration of that comes from your conditioning or your desires. I have illustrated earlier too. Many of you might have heard this, but it bears repetition. There is this Islamic girl called Sania Mirza, who is playing tennis extremely well and has come among the first 100 women in the world. She's the first girl from India to come to that level, has become somewhat famous. Now the Muslim cleric looks at her playing tennis and he's shocked that an Islamic girl is exposing her legs, wearing that kind of dress and so on. So he gets angry and he issues a fatwa that she should be forbidden from playing tennis. So he is reacting from his own point of view. The press photographer is interested in taking a sexy photograph for his magazine or newspaper. And so he is watching from that point of view and trying to take a picture which will sell. The judge, umpire, his job is to find out if anybody has played foul, if the foot has gone beyond the line or where the ball fell and so on, and he has to keep track of the score. So he is also not able to pay his attention to the whole game. And he is looking selectively from the point of view of what he has to do. So who is able to watch the tennis? The observer who just comes there, who has no axe to grind, who is watching the game just for the love of it, for the joy of it. He is the one who sees the beauty of the game of tennis, which is going on. So you see how your own desires, your predilections, your views affect your reactions and your perceptions. So is it possible to have a silent mind, a witness consciousness, which is not judging, which is not condemning, which is not extolling, which is only paying attention and watching what is going on and experiencing the joy or the beauty of the game? Can you watch your own self, your consciousness like that? Without reacting, without judging, without condemning, without feeling ashamed, and so on. Because I read a saying, I don't know who wrote that, but it has stuck to my mind because it's very true. It says, repentance is man's second mistake. First he commits a mistake, then he repents that he committed a mistake, and that repentance is his second mistake. Because the repentance doesn't teach you anything. You don't learn, you're just condemning yourself. If you make a mistake, you make an error, it's important to learn from that error and correct yourself and move on. It's not important to have shame and repentance and all that. So the repentance becomes the second mistake. But that's what we have been trained to do. To judge, to evaluate, to condemn, and so on. And Krishnaji is saying, can you watch with a silent mind, not a chattering mind? Don't bring in all your past opinions and so on and judgments into or measurements into it. Just watch. Stay with the question and watch. And you will learn how your consciousness operates. It's that learning which transforms consciousness, which tells you what is true and what is false, and how the disorder is arising in the consciousness. If you watch it, you become aware. Just as you must know how a car operates before you can repair that car or make any changes to it. In the same way, if you want to transform consciousness, you have to first know how your consciousness works. You can't do a thing without knowing how it works. But we try to do it with will, without knowing how it works. And that makes it more complicated. So self-knowledge is simply passive awareness. Passive because you are not interfering with the phenomenon that is taking place. There may be anger, there may be jealousy, there may be a feeling of competition and rivalry. Can you observe it without judging, without condemning? And pay attention and look at the source of it. From where does it arise? And you will see that it comes from your own approach. Some illusion that you are maintaining in your own mind. The illusion may be that it is very important to win the game. That may be an illusion. That opinion that it's very important to win the game may be an illusion. You will notice that whenever there is a match, we are mostly interested in knowing who won. It's a wrong question to ask. What is important is, did they enjoy the game which they were playing? Because you play the game not to win, but to enjoy the process of playing the game. But we give importance to the result. And we are all trained in that. So that our conditioning interferes with our observation. You have to catch yourself doing all this because one doesn't realize this conditioning operating and forming opinions. One takes those opinions to be truths. And that is a form of deception, self-deception, which goes on. Particularly because the ego wants to feel support itself. It's always favoring the first person singular. That's what the ego is. But if one can stay with this egoistic reaction, watch it, see the consequences of it in one's life, you will discover that it's the source of all conflict, all anxiety, all boredom, frustration, all the negative emotions. And it's spoiling your life. And then when you perceive the danger of that for yourself by staying with it and watching it, it will cease. Because nature has put an intelligence into us which doesn't let us court danger. But you are not aware of the danger. Consider the ego to be a friend, to be a benefactor. And that's one central illusion of whole of humanity, that it thinks that acting out of self-interest is in its self-interest. It's not, it is not. Each person acting out of self-interest is what is causing all the disorder in our society that we are seeing. But we don't realize that. So we are not aware of the danger of this. Now, Krishna said, the schools will do it for the children. They must grow up in an atmosphere in which you are promoting sensitivity, perception of beauty, of nature, of art, of music, all that sensitivity. And you are inculcating this inquiry for self-knowledge, learning about oneself. What about the adults? And so towards the end of his life, he said, you must create study centers where adults can come get away from their job, come for a retreat for a week or 2 weeks, look at their life from a distance in an environment which is peaceful, where there is beauty, where there is nature. And he said it should be a religious place. So I asked him, what do you mean by a religious place? Will you tell me a little more? Because he was making me in charge of the study center at Rajghat. He said, a place is religious when the mind there is religious, meaning it is in quest of truth. Not because some great man stayed there, not because the Buddha stayed there or Lord Rama stepped there and so on. That doesn't make that place religious. The mind there now must be religious. The second qualification, he said, it must attract the true pilgrim. That means a man who is in quest of truth must feel that he has a better chance of coming upon it if he comes there. And the third, it must be a sanctuary for all life. These are the three requirements that make a place a religious place. What we consider to be a religious place is completely different. He said temples and churches and mosques are not religious places because no learning is taking place there. So you're not coming upon order in consciousness, which means you're not coming upon virtue. And the entire purpose of religion is to come upon virtue. In the West, it was Socrates who pointed out that there is only one virtue, and that is order in consciousness. And the Buddha in the East pointed out the same thing. We admire these sages, but we haven't listened to what they have said, or investigated, or come upon the truth of that. So it is important to have this learning mind. And Krishnaji wanted both kinds of learning to take place in his educational institution. First rate at techniques and knowledge, and first rate also at the level of consciousness. If you want to live with a first-rate consciousness, it must be free of conditioning. It must be free of the past. It must be free from illusions. Otherwise, you are not living in a real world. You are living in an illusory world of your own thoughts. It's not the real world. And that's the cause of disorder and conflict and so on. So I'll end it there, and we can perhaps discuss some questions, because this is a very different meaning that he gives to the religious mind. That is this learning mind that is the religious mind. And it has no belief, no dogma. It moves from fact to fact. These are his words about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Krishna. The first question we have is from Shankar. Request Dr. Krishna to explain how the name and form are creating the illusion, and what is perceiving without name and form.
When you give a name, with that name are associated a lot of images and opinions which are held in your memory, in your conditioning. And so the word, the name, evokes all that and prevents observation, prevents paying attention. As soon as you see a tree, you give a name to that tree, then you have botanical knowledge about that name and so on. All that enters into your reactions. And you are not able to watch that tree without all that interference of your knowledge. And therefore, he used to give it as an exercise. Can you look at that tree without naming it? Can you look at a rose without naming it? Because otherwise, all kinds of poems about the rose and so on, everything comes up in memory. And that's how the past interferes with your perception in the present and distorts you or distracts you. And it's important to be able to pay undistorted attention in order to come upon the truth. The truth being the undistorted perception of what actually is, namely the fact. One example I can give is, I don't know whether you live in India or abroad, but usually the same actor plays the part of a villain. So your mind associates that actor's face with villainy. And you go to a tea party and you find a man who resembles this face. And it'll give you the feeling that there is something wrong with this man. He is a villain. Because that villainy is associated with that face, and this fellow resembles that. So like that, you have a lot of psychological judgments coming in, which are false, which are coming from your own images in the mind. So it can be from the name, it can be from the rupa, which is the face, the sight.
We have a question from Cecilia Martinez. Sir, I realized the feeling of deep anger and sadness when seeing throughout life how human beings are. That anger, I cannot find its root, and I see how it is reflected in my actions in the relationship with others. Could this desire to change the human being be an ambition?
No, but it's an illusion, because really speaking, you can't change anybody. You cannot change society. There are deep-rooted causes why society is the way it is. And similarly, there are deep-rooted causes why we are the way we are. And it's only when those causes are eliminated through self-knowledge that there can be a real change. So if you are really interested in helping somebody, you have to educate him. You have to help him free his mind of the illusions which create the distortion in his mind. That would require great empathy, friendship, not judgment and condemnation and a feeling of hatred and all that. So when your mind looks at humanity and feels that humanity, dislikes humanity, you're committing an error. If your brother is addicted to alcohol, if you want to help him, you have to help him get over his addiction, his habit. You have to understand him and help him to understand himself and free himself of that habit. But if you just condemn him and hate him, you are adding to his problem. He has one problem, which is the addiction. And now he has a second problem, that his sister or brother is hating him. So you're making his life more difficult. So I have a question to give you, which you can ponder on in your own free time. We feel great sympathy for a man who is physically blind. We show him across the road, we bring him a chair, we give him food, because we feel he is deprived of sight, and we feel great pity for him. When a human being is mentally blind, why do we hate him? Why does that compassion, that sympathy not come? Isn't he also blind? Isn't the terrorist also blind? So the fact that we hate that man is our blindness, our ignorance. We don't realize that. We feel somehow that by hating him, I mean, there is this saying in English that blaming others is a dishonest way of praising oneself. So you have to be very careful. This kind of deception goes on in our own minds. I've often said that the popes have been greater sinners than the sinners, because they have condemned human beings, hated human beings. That sinner was probably just giving way to temptation and having sex with someone he should not have had sex with. And to hate another human being is a far greater sin. So you judge that human being and you persecute him or hate him. That's a far greater sin than the sin of having sex outside with someone you should not be having. That's just you're breaking a social rule, that's all. So that's why it's important to doubt all this. The doubt is a great cleansing quality. That doubt is the same as inquiry, as questioning. So beware of your own opinions. They appear like truths, but they may not be truths.
There is a question that refers to something from this answer as well, from Sam. Sir, what is the role of doubt in inquiry? And will that not create conflict and explanations, and therefore loss of energy and vitality?
Yeah, it depends on what you mean by doubt. By doubt, I don't mean suspicion. It's not that you are doubting the other, not trusting him. No, that's a different kind of doubt. This is doubting your own opinion, whether it is true, not taking it for granted that what you think is absolute truth may not be. You may be deceiving yourself. So to have that doubt is to have the humility to know that what you think may not be true. That's all. Otherwise, if you already know, what are you learning? So learning begins only when you know that you don't know. Otherwise, you are spreading your own illusion to others because you think that is the truth. You can't spread truth like that. There is an interesting question and answer which comes to my mind. At the end of one of his talks in Madras, somebody got up in the audience and said, "Sir, I'm very enthusiastic about your teaching. I want to spread it. Tell me what is the best way to do that?" And Krishnaji said, "Sir," he gave a long reply, but I am paraphrasing it. "Sir, don't try to spread the teaching. You will only spread the word, and the word is not the teaching. So unless you discover the truth and then you talk about it with others, you don't know whether you are spreading truth or you are spreading illusion. So what is important is to inquire for yourself and come upon perception and speak from your perception rather than repeat the words of Krishnamurti or somebody else. It's important to investigate what he has said. This is not what I am saying. This is what he has himself said. He said, don't accept what I say. Investigate it. And that's what we are doing. It's not important to come to a conclusion. Truth is not a conclusion. Truth is at the level of perception. So don't make a conclusion out of it and then remember that conclusion and carry it with you. The idea of the truth is not the truth. So that's why when somebody put the same question to Krishnaji, he wouldn't answer from the previous conclusion. He would again investigate that question and answer from perception. We have been, in our education, we have been trained to depend on our knowledge and our past for our decisions. And here, it's a very different learning that Krishnaji is talking about. It's independent of the past. You have to free yourself of the past, not bring in all your knowledge and judgment and all that. It's a very different kind of learning.
Now I will ask a question from Prasad Kongara. Can you comment on the differences between exploration one does sitting with a psychoanalyst and the exploration in going deeper that J.K. asked us to do? What are the similarities and differences in those two explorations?
I've never really myself done psychoanalysis with a psychologist, so I can't speak from first-hand knowledge of this. But from what I know about psychoanalysis, they go into your past, and then from the past, they come to the evaluation of what complexes you might have gathered from the past experience and which are causing the disturbance in the present. That knowledge is not wrong, but that won't end the disturbance in the present. Because the knowledge of the cause doesn't end the cause. The knowledge of the cause your psychology book will give you. For whatever happens, the psychology book gives you the causation behind it. But that's just the idea of the causation, no? You have not perceived that for yourself. And truth lies at the level of perception. That's why in this field, the ideas and the arguments only have the value of creating a question. They don't have the value of giving you the truth, bringing you the truth. And that's important to realize. That's why it's called insight. You see the truth, insight. You see it beyond all these ideation and conceptualization. It's not at the level of conceptualization. In science and in art and so on, also it operates, but only for the man who first makes an important discovery. That man has an insight which breaks away from the past and brings something new into it. That capacity is there in human consciousness to make a foray into the unknown and bring something that is unknown into the field of the known. But in this field of self-knowledge, the known becomes a barrier. And therefore, Krishna says, even if you have perceived the truth, don't turn it into a knowledge and put it in your memory bank. Die to it. Come upon it again when next time you need it. That means your capacity for perception has to grow, not for conclusion. Whether you get the conclusion from the Buddha or you do it from your own experience, a conclusion is a dead thing. So don't live with conclusions, live with questions.
The next question is from Pepe. Can any brain be free of conditioning or some? The culture could be an impediment to being free.
It is provided you get attached to it, but otherwise not. Otherwise, it's like any other object or fact. The object or fact doesn't bind you. But if you get attached to that object, you bind yourself to it. So the conditioning is a fact. The brain has done its job of remembering things, experiences which you have had since childhood. That's sitting there inside you. There's no way you can erase that. It's not like a blackboard on which something is written which you can wipe with a duster. But why do you identify with it? Your opinion based on that is also the opinion of a conditioned mind. Not very different from your friend's opinion based on his condition. And no opinion is the truth. So why accept your own opinion as the truth? That is the ego, that it considers the first person singular perception as something unique. It's not unique. You are also a conditioned entity, and your opinions are not truths. So they must be doubted as the opinions of all others that you hear. And you have to come upon the truth for yourself. The only sure sign that you have come upon some truth is to watch your consciousness. And if it is free from disorder, then you know that you have come upon the truth. There's no other way to know that you have come upon the truth, because your mind will deceive you and tell you that you have come upon the truth when you have not.
And there is a second question. Is pain and sorrow necessary to grow up?
No, it is not necessary, but it occurs in life. And if it occurs, it's an opportunity to learn about oneself. It's not a misfortune. We look upon it as a misfortune. We look upon pleasures and profits as windfalls, and we look upon failures and pains as misfortune. But that's just an opinion, judgment based on what I like and what I don't like. That is an ego's reaction. The learning mind values it because it gives it an opportunity to learn. So at one time, Krishna used to say, "Sir, sorrow is a great teacher. Why do you want to avoid sorrow? Sorrow is a great teacher." So if you are really interested in learning, you don't try to avoid sorrow or escape from sorrow. You learn from sorrow. Because sorrow, if it comes, is telling you there's some illusion somewhere in your mind which is creating this sorrow. You're not approaching life rightly. Find out what the error is and correct it. That's the learning mind. The other reactive mind is a crying mind. You sit down and cry, "Oh, why did this happen to me?" It's all self-pity and so on. That's not a learning mind. That's the reactive mind.
All right, now we have a question from Prasad Mulupuri. One wants to listen to everyone with full attention, but some speakers are so confused or tedious or so prejudiced, it becomes extremely difficult to pay attention to what they say till the end. How to cope with such speakers?
You have to learn patience. It's an opportunity to learn patience. Yes, somebody is very boring. What do? You want to hear a lecture and it is a boring lecture. You don't feel interested in it. Quite a frequent occurrence. Your fretting and fuming doesn't remove the boredom, right? So you're adding to the problem. You're feeling bored, and on top of it, you're fretting and fuming. So learn about the fretting and fuming and why you do that. That becomes your inquiry. You can always learn. You know, when you sit down for dialogue, sometimes two people will start arguing and fighting with each other. It's a great opportunity to learn how division occurs. That's exactly how division occurs also between Zelensky and Putin. It's the same that happens between friends in a dialogue. And so it's an opportunity to learn how you stick to your own opinion and the other person sticks to his opinion. And it starts a small war. It doesn't result in physical assault, but it results in hurts and so on. But the process is the same. So you can always learn from a dialogue. There is no such thing as a bad dialogue. If your mind is in a state of dialogue, it will learn. A good dialogue means what? Everybody expressed politely and agreed with everybody else. That's a good dialogue. You haven't come upon any truth.
The next question is from Pepe. Is a brain rollover needed to find peace?
Well, everything takes place through the brain, no? Awareness is also through the brain. Pain and pleasure is also through the brain. And if you don't have the brain, you are dead. Then perhaps there is no problem. But there is a nice joke about it, which Krishna told. I'd like to share that with you. Two friends die, and they go to heaven. And then John is talking to Scott and saying, Scott, if I'm really dead, why do I feel so awful? That means that is also an assumption that with death, all this thing ends. You don't know.
The next question is from Elena Borenki. What do you mean when saying sanctuary for all life?
All life must feel protected in that place. I mean, that was Krishnaji's meaning, for one of the meanings for the religious place, that it must be protective of all life, plant life, animal life, human life, the poor, the rich, everybody should feel protected in that place. The greatest protection is awareness of the truth, because it's this illusion that creates all the division and disorder and insecurity. So the religious mind is the secure mind. The irreligious mind thinks it is secure, but it's not secure. It's creating all this disorder, which is creating the greatest insecurity in the world. Unfortunately, we have equated religion with belief. Religion is not belief. That's a wrong definition of religion. Krishnaji pointed out that the word religion comes from religare, which means to unite. And belief doesn't unite, belief divides. Because my belief is different from your belief. And what does belief mean? I don't need to believe that this is a light. I see that it's a light. I don't need to believe that that's a door. I see that it's a door. So when do you believe? When you don't see. When you don't see, why is it not good enough to say, I don't know? Why do you have to believe something? That's a question. Stay with that question.
Now we have a question from Pepe. Kay said that when fear exists, there is no love. If I have fear every day, will it ever come to an end?
Well, when you have fear, you are searching for security, which is the opposite of fear. We said that earlier, that there are these three fears that produce three drives in human beings. The fear of the future, the fear of loneliness, and the fear of being nobody. The fear of the future makes you amass wealth so that you will be provided forever. The fear of loneliness is overcome through attachments. Overcome means it's just subdued. It's there because there is the fear of that attachment ending. But it's covered up with this attachment. You feel sure that this relationship will always be there and I will not experience loneliness. And the third, the fear of being nobody, drives people to get status and power so that nobody will dare to insult you or touch you. So these three drives are really coming from three fears. They are all egoistic drives. So the ego itself is a result of fear. So when you talk about freeing yourself from fear, you are talking about freedom from the ego process. It's the same thing.
The next question is from Chandra. Sir, how can parents practice learning mind, specifically dealing with teenage kids who are stubborn, stupid most times, and cause a lot of hurt and pain?
If one has cared for them right from childhood, given them love, and been intimate with them, I don't see why they would become like that. But the grown-ups, the parents, are busy with their own ambitions, and they ignore what is happening with the child. They sort of vaguely want that the child should do well, should be healthy, should get a lot of knowledge and attain success in life. That's not the same as caring for a child and its well-being. So Krishnaji used to say, you don't love your children. If you did, you won't send them to schools like this, which educate them for power and for competition and for war. You would demand a different kind of education for them. But you don't love. You only have some vague idea that you are wishing them well in life and so on. That's not love. So quite a lot of it is a neglect on the part of the parent. But I don't say in every case, each individual case has its own history.
We have a question from Isabel Cepeda. What is the difference between awareness and attention?
Awareness is not directed towards any particular thing. It takes the whole thing in. I mean, I'm right now, I'm aware that I'm giving this talk. I'm aware of the light in the room. I'm aware of the sound of the fan, and so on, so on. So one is aware of the entire environment. But the attention, my attention is going to forming the sentences and the words with which I want to convey the meaning of which I want to convey to you. So attention is more focused, but they belong in the same bracket. They are in the same bracket. It's not a thought activity. Attention is also part of observation. Awareness is also observation. And that's not the same as thinking. So it's not the product of conditioning. You may pay more attention to something than to other things. That differentiation may come from conditioning, because you have been told what is important and what is not important, what you should pay attention to and what does not deserve to be attended to. That kind of differentiation comes from conditioning. But attention itself is a capacity of the human consciousness, which is not a thought faculty. When you are not interested in something, you pay attention. If you have to force yourself to pay attention, then there is a conflict.